All right, you guys can see this. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, nice. You got your notebooks out, ready to start? All right. Who remembers what we talked about last time? There was one thing that I said I wanted you guys to do and think about. So do you guys remember that? Anybody just shout out first row, who remembers that?
Being mindful.
Okay, who was that?
Abdullah.
Okay. Awesome, Abdullah. And being mindful, what does that really mean? How can we be mindful of what?
Anyone?
If you guys have your, sorry, you said something?
American go.
Okay, go ahead. What do you think it means?
Probably being mindful of God, being mindful of your surroundings, and because think where you are.
Okay, good. That's right. That's good. Being mindful of God, understanding and being aware of what we're doing each day, being aware of our time, and just understanding, what purpose are we living for each day? What's our goal? And so that's one thing that's important because it allows us to be more in the present time, less wasting of time, more understanding of what we're working for actually, and then we can build and we can improve ourselves. So, quick question for you guys. Do you guys know that little screen time thing that on many of your phones, it shows you how much screen time you've used in the past week? Take a look at that if you don't usually, and just see how much time you spend on the phone. For me, granted, it's sometimes I spend 3-4 hours on the phone, which is a lot of time because I just spend that time on my phone and I'm not really doing anything else. And so I've wasted about 4 or 5 hours each day, which in hindsight is a lot. So that's what we're trying to understand is how much time are we really wasting and how much time are we really using for something beneficial. So yeah, stay away from the internet, guys. It's gonna catch you. It's gonna draw you in. I'm kidding. You need the internet sometimes. All right. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Bismillah. All right. So, lesson 4 today, guys. Great job being here, first of all. You guys are continuing up the effort to learn. So, that's good for you. Keep trying your hardest and keep trying to just understand the stories, understand the lessons, apply the principles, and just gain as much knowledge as you can about the Prophet ﷺ. That's one of the best things you can spend your time doing. So here's the outline for today. That is not the outline. There it is. Okay, so last class, we talked about the early beginnings of the Prophet ﷺ in his life. We talked about his birth, some miracles that occurred during his birth. We talked about the year of the elephants, which is a very important event. We'll go over that today as well, because I want to go a bit more in depth in that and just understand the implications and significance of the event. And then we also talked about how many times the Arabs would send their early children into the desert when they're developing and when it's their time to feed from the breast, so breast milking. During that time, they send their kids to the desert. And there's some reasons that we talked about, and we understood why they do that. So we'll briefly go over that again today as well. And then we'll go over two significant events from the Prophet ﷺ's early years that really signified that prophethood was about to come. So these are important events in his early life. And then we'll stop there, inshallah. Perhaps we can do a little bit of discussion with ourselves and maybe a few here and there descriptions and just thinking about the Prophet ﷺ. All right. So this picture is not necessarily a picture of Mecca because, as you know, 1,000 years ago, they didn't have cameras, but you can imagine this is what it approximately looks like, the city of Mecca. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is the year of the elephant. In last class, we talked about this as well. There was an army of elephants basically approaching Mecca to try and destroy the Kaaba. So why do you think somebody would have the intention to destroy the Kaaba? I mean, today we know it as a house of God. It's a very respectable place. But Does anybody have any thoughts as to why somebody would want to destroy the Kaaba? Let's see. Zaid. Oh, Mikhail has a hand up?
Yeah, I had his hand up.
Okay, Mikhail, go ahead.
Because there was like a lot of jealousy at that time, and like they saw like that a lot of people were getting drawn into Islam, and that the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu was like spreading a good message, and it took away from the other religions, and they really didn't like that, so they wanted to attack God.
So close, you have the right idea, but not exactly. So at this time, sorry, did somebody else say something?
Yeah, somebody else.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go with another person.
Okay. Basically, they want to replace it. Replace it with someone else, like a church or something.
Nice. That's a concise answer, but you're more on the point. So somebody, because of political reasons, they wanted to replace the Kaaba. So at this time, Islam in its formal manner, the message of the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ had not come yet because the Prophet wasn't born yet. This was in the year 570. It's the year that the Prophet ﷺ was born. So this occurrence occurred as the Prophet ﷺ was coming in this world. So Islam in its formal manner wasn't here yet. There were some people at this time that did worship only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Most of the people in Mecca were idol worshippers. So, like I said, Islam, monotheism, which is worship of one God, it was not as widespread in Mecca. There were a few people who were called Hunafa or Hanif, and that means basically somebody who is sincere to the worship of Allah, one God. There were a few people like that, but at this time, it was mostly idol worship in Mecca. So the reason why somebody from outside of Mecca wanted to destroy the Kaaba was because of politics and economics, wealth and power. If you guys study AP history in high school, I think some of you guys are there and some of you guys will get there. You'll understand that a lot of motivations behind historical occurrences, wars, domination, politics, these are all, especially colonialism as well, colonialism and the Spanish conquests. A lot of it is just based on wealth and power. You know, people want to take over land, they want to gain wealth, use resources, and have power in the world. So a lot of motivations behind historical events occur because of this. So similarly, here's the same thing. So let's get into it now. There was a governor in Yemen. He was underneath the control of the Abyssinian king. So we have two places here, Yemen, well, three places, Yemen, Abyssinia, and Mecca. And this is a map right here. So you guys can kind of visualize what we're talking about here geographically. So the Abyssinian king, he's taken over parts of Yemen, and he sends this guy by the name of Abraha, and he's the governor of Yemen. So he's in this bottom territory here. And this guy, he's controlling Yemen, and he sees a lot of his people, a lot of the civilians over there. They're going to Mecca for the pilgrimage every year. And he becomes curious and he says, where are you guys going? What are you guys doing? And so they tell him, you know, there's a pilgrimage. We go over there. There's a house of God over there. And so he thinks, you know what? I want this to be where I am. I want this to be in my province, in my city. And, you know, we talked about how Islam isn't exactly in its formal manner here, but people still had religion. So the Kaaba was recognized as a house of God or a holy place, and people would still do pilgrimage over there, even though they didn't have the Hajj, which we know today. They had their own sort of rights. So every year the Hajj is going on, and this guy, Abraha, he wants that fame. He wants that ability to call people and have a center of wealth and trade in his city. So he says, I'm going to build something and I'm going to make it the best building I can make. It's going to be the most beautiful, the most grand, and it's going to call all people to my place, to Yemen. And so he tries to make a church, a very, very large church. And the reason is to redirect traffic to his city for wealth and power. And the people over there, they say, listen, you won't be able to call people unless this house of God, unless you go through these people, basically. So the people in Mecca, unless you destroy them, essentially. And so he set out and he tried to destroy the house of Allah, the Kaaba in Mecca. And if you guys know a little bit about biology, elephants in the Hijaz area, which is the Saudi Arabia, Mecca, Medina, those places, they're not natural. Elephants are from the African region. So this guy, Abraha, in Yemen, he has a army of elephants, basically. And he's trained them to be warlike elephants. So people get news that he's going to go and try to break down the Kaaba. And there's a lot of religious people here, people that make pilgrimage, and they say, you can't do that. We're gonna try and stop you. And so on his way to Mecca, as you can see, Yemen is a bit far away. He has to fight many people. And word gets around that nobody's able to stop these elephants because they're so powerful and so strong. And so he decimates people as he goes along his path and as he continues and continues. And when he gets close to Mecca, he stops at the city called Ta'if. And now the people in Mecca have heard news and it's a bit frightening for them. So at this point, he calls and he says, I want to meet with the leader of the people of Mecca. And one way we can understand this idea of leadership in Mecca is something we talked about, I believe, last class. We talked about how people in the Middle East at this time were more so in tribes. So this right here is a map. And obviously, it's a lot of names, a lot of words. You don't have to know all of these. Just the basics of this is that the people in Mecca were under a large tribe called the Quraysh. Many of you have probably heard this name. The Quraysh, it's just a consolidation of many different familial tribes. So take a look at this chart here, and you'll see that there's various different clans in boxes stemming from the top. And this top was one of the original people to arrive in Mecca. So let's say somebody arrives in Mecca, they establish themselves, and then their family starts growing. And from this, many tribes start to settle and start to establish themselves. And all the way down to the Prophet ﷺ, we have Adi, we have Taim, all the way down to Hashim. Hashim is a tribe of the Prophet ﷺ. And from this tribe, there's a man named Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib. He is the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ, as he is the father of the Prophet ﷺ's father. And you can see this in the family tree here. So Abdul Muttalib at this point, he's known as the leader of the Quraysh. And the description of him is pretty awe-inspiring. He was known as a very stately man. He was strong. He looked like a leader, and he was extremely handsome. So, and one more thing to know about this is the interesting thing about these tribes is that some tribes had specific roles and specific advantages. So if you look at Hashim tribe, this tribe was one of the more foremost leaders of the Quraysh, and they were in charge of giving water to the pilgrims. And this is an honorable thing because the Arabs really pride themselves in generosity. So the Hashim, they had this ability to give pilgrims water, support them, host them. And they were also leaders of the Quraysh. And other tribes such as Bani Abd al-Shams, which is right next to Hashim, was also an important tribe. So that's one thing to just keep in mind, the tribal structure and how different families had different roles. And the tribe of the Prophet ﷺ was the Hashimi tribe. So going back to this guy, Abraha, who wants to come and just demolish the Kaaba, he meets with Abdul Muttalib. And when Abdul Muttalib, he goes outside of the city and he meets with him. And just the figure and the awe of Abdul Muttalib, his bold stature, causes Abraha to have respect in him. And he comes down off of his throne and he meets him face to face. And at this point, when Abraha came to Mecca, he initially captured 200 camels of Abdul Muttalib's, and he sat outside the city. So Abdul Muttalib and Abraha meet together. And Abraha, in his pride and in his kind of dominant, appearance, because he's coming to kind of demolish the Kaaba and take away this really respected token that Mecca has. So he says, ask me anything, and let's talk and discuss, what do you want from me? And Abdul Muttalib, he's a man of strong faith. So all he says is, you have 200 of my camels, I want those back. And at this point, Abraha, because of his arrogance, he lost respect for Abdul Muttalib. And he said something like, I'm here to destroy the Kaaba, and all you care about is your property, your camels. And then Abdul Muttalib says that the house, and it's paraphrasing, the house, the Kaaba, has a Lord that will protect it. The camels have an owner that will protect it, and I'm responsible for the camels. So basically, he's saying that Allah will protect the house. That's not my responsibility. And so after this, you can see a miracle happens. Abdul Muttalib, he goes back and he makes dua to Kaaba, and he says, like, similar to how we would ask Allah to protect this Kaaba. And the elephant army marches forward, and they're coming, and they're approaching Mecca. And one of the elephants stops in the path of the Kaaba, and it does not move. They try to move it in every other direction, except for the movement towards the Kaaba. It won't move that way. And then at that point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends birds with tiny pebbles. And what happens is these pebbles come down with such force and speed that they decimate the entire army of Abraha. And this is attested in Surah Al-Fil, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ تَرْمِيهِمْ بِحِجَارَةٍ مِّن سِجِّيلٍ. A flock of birds, numerous birds, just appears out of nowhere. And they start pelting this army with stones of baked clay until they were left decimated in the land. Like Allah says in the surah, تَرْمِيهِمْ بِحِجَارَةٍ مِّن سِجِّيلٍ فَجَعَلَهُمْ كَعَصْفٍ مَأْكُولٍ, like eaten straw. So if you guys have ever gone to a farm or have seen dry grass, think of that. It's completely flat and dead. So now think of this powerful army and how Allah protected his Kaaba and completely destroyed them. It's a miracle. And this is attested in the surah revealed by Allah. And people were also alive at this occurrence, and they were watching this happen. So this event is known as something, it's called mutawatir. In Arabic, that means it's highly attested, which means it's like reliable. It was true because so many people saw this, and people at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, who were a bit older than him and witnessed this event, also attest to its truth. They say that this indeed happened. So this is a miracle when the Prophet ﷺ was coming into the world. And the reason why it's important, the Arabs traditionally did not keep dates. So like we have a track of, okay, today's 2023 or 2022. The Arabs didn't keep these years. They would only remember a year if there was a special event that occurred. So this event is really special, and they remembered it. And it just so happens that the Prophet ﷺ was born in this year. So we have a correct estimate as to when he was born. And lastly, it's just a foreshadowing of great events to occur. This is only the first of them. All right. So we'll get to that later. So now let's do a quick recap. Last time we discussed the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. We discussed various miracles at the time of the birth, like the pregnancy being very easy, and the mother of the Prophet ﷺ, Amina, she saw a really bright light occur at the time of the birth. And this light was so bright, it was like it shone the palaces of Syria, which obviously is far away from Mecca. So these are some miracles. And we also talked about the culture of sending kids to the desert for a cleaner environment. And it's said that the reason why they did this was because Mecca was a city and there was a lot of people there, and it wasn't as much movement. It was similar to how we live in cities today. We're a bit sedentary. We don't move our houses back and forth. And so I was just thinking about this. And if they in that time wanted to move their kids away from Mecca to find a cleaner environment, what do we think about our environment today with a lot of pollution? We're more sedentary than them. We stay in one place. So yeah, I just imagine, guys, get outside today. Just enjoy that fresh air you can breathe, and just enjoy the fact that you can move, you can exercise, and that you can just be healthy. It's a very important part of life, and they were actually very aware of this. And so they wanted their children to develop this healthy characteristic early on in life. And so they took a priority for this. So normally when this occurred, the Bedouins from outside the city in the countryside would come into the city looking for wealthy families. So Bedouins who are looking for wages, a husband and wife, they would come into the city and they'd try to see which wealthy families have their children ready to go for the desert. And interesting thing over here is the Arabs before Islam had this principle of ihsan. And ihsan is really translated as excellence. And you could think of it in terms of when someone treats you well, you treat them back well. This is an established principle in the social culture of the Arabs. Do unto others as you wish to be done unto you. So treat others the way you want to be treated, right? We still have this principle today. So that was the essence, that a Bedouin family could come and, take care of this child and really develop this child. And they would return the child after a year or two, and they would get a nice wage, a nice relationship with a wealthy family, just some social status and some recognition and ability to live and just get food for themselves. So this is it. This is ayah over here on the slide. It's an ayah from Surah Rahman. It's one of the most profound surahs in the Quran. Is there any reward for goodness except goodness? So similar to this principle of ihsan. Hal jaza ul ihsani illa al ihsan. Is there any reward for excellence except excellence? So think about all the different times where somebody has done something good to you out of just the purity of their heart. They just, all they want to do is just do something good for you to make you happy. And imagine how that makes you feel at that point, that someone cared about you so much like that. This is a established cultural norm in the Arab society. And I have a story about this. I have a Arab friend over here. And oftentimes this idea of generosity in Arabic is called karam. You could say that he's the epitome of generosity. Every time we go out to buy something and I offer to half the price or to pay for something, and he refuses. He wants to pay for it. And every time we have breakfast, he's always the one bringing the ingredients and cooking for us and hosting us and calling people to just have food together. And I always wonder, why does he do this? What's the reasoning behind it? And it's just this idea of generosity and treating people with compassion and excellence. It's a prophetic sunnah, and it's also the norm of the Arab tradition. So that's one thing we learn, and it's a very, very good principle. So next time, the easiest thing to do is see the person that serves you the most in your life. For many of us, it's our parents. So next time you see your parents, make sure that you show them gratitude and do something for them, because they've done a lot for you. All right, so we're going to get to this one in a little bit. Before that, we're going to talk about Abdul Muttalib a little bit and kind of the events that occur prior to this event of splitting the chest. So Abdul Muttalib, he's the leader of the Quraysh, as we talked about. And at this point, the occurrence of the elephants has occurred. The Prophet ﷺ is now born, and he's developing in the desert. And Abdul Muttalib is reaching his eldest years. He's almost 70. So as you can see, his authority would probably diminish a little bit in the tribes. He's becoming more of an elder. And so other tribes are looking to rise up, and the outside Bedouins are seeking to secure ties with powerful families. So the Prophet ﷺ, unfortunately, his father passes away very early. And this, in essence, makes him an orphan in the Arab society. So his father's passed away. His mother has really not much money. And therefore, nobody really takes the Prophet ﷺ to take care for him in the desert, except for one person who we talked about last class. Her name is Halima. And interestingly, Halima in Arabic it means care and concern. So you can see a lot of themes about compassion, care, concern, and love being the theme for the early years of the Prophet ﷺ. But she had a pure intention, and she said to her husband, it's not nice if we return back to our countryside without having taken anybody. Because if you recall, last class, we talked about how she was late to the city. She doesn't have a lot of money, or she doesn't even have a good animal to ride on. And so all the wealthy families are taken, and she's left with this one orphan who seems not to be a good choice because there's no money involved. It'll be hard to take care of this orphan without having funds from my own family. But as they make their rounds, they see that all the children are gone from the city. And she says, it's not nice if we return without a child. So I'm just going to, consider this an act of charity, and let's take this child, let's take this orphan with us. And hopefully, inshallah, Allah will give us something good. So this pure intention, act of charity, Allah rewards that. Because is there any reward for excellence except excellence? So we talked about last time, certain miracles occurred. When she came back to the countryside, she didn't have food for her animals, but as soon as the Prophet ﷺ was in her care, her animals were fed daily, and they came back with enough milk to provide for the family. So this is a miracle that occurred, and she keeps the Prophet ﷺ until he comes to the age of 4. So now we're reaching this occurrence of splitting of the chest. So question for you guys: raise your hand if you know what open heart surgery is. And I know many of you guys have probably heard of it. So I see a hand. I see a couple of hands. Okay, good. So the splitting of the chest, it's interesting nowadays. If you tell somebody that I went to the hospital and they took a knife and just split my chest open and they took my heart out, that would be normal. Obviously it sounds a little bit disgusting and frightening, but it's normal because we know about it and we know that doctors do it. But many, many years ago, if somebody said that, somebody just randomly came and split open a chest and then took a heart out, that would be almost freakish. That's not normal. So what happens here is the Prophet ﷺ, he's in the countryside under the care of Halima, and 2 men dressed in pure white shirt. So just imagine, almost heavenly figures. And these are said to be angels. So 2 men dressed in pure white split, similar to how a doctor wears a robe and a gown, and they have their hands sanitized, no germs on them, similar to that. They're coming down and they lay the Prophet ﷺ on his back, and they split his chest and take his heart out. And with them is a golden bowl full of ice or snow. And interestingly, they put that heart in the ice bowl. And we know about this is because somebody was there, actually, one of the foster brothers or companions of the Prophet ﷺ at that time. He was witnessing this, and he ran back to Halima and said, listen, this is happening. I'm scared. I don't know what's going on. And at that time, the Prophet ﷺ, so they have his heart, the 2 men, in a bowl of ice. Now, if you guys have seen open heart surgery before, or if you've studied about it, you know that oftentimes they either pour cold water over the heart to slow the metabolic rate and just preserve the heart, which is very interesting because it's very similar to what the angels did over here. And so moving on forward, the angels were washing this heart. And there's various reasons behind why they did this. Some of the reasons could be that they wanted to purify the heart and prepare the Prophet ﷺ for his journey as a prophet, to give him a bit more ability to be responsible, and to save him from falling into different sins. So there's various reasons behind that. That's one of the reasons. And what happens is they put the heart back, and they close up the chest, and Halima comes and she's very scared. She's frightened. She's like, what's going on? What just happened? And when the Prophet ﷺ tells her what happened, she initially thinks that something really bad has just occurred, and the Prophet ﷺ has been touched by a devil or something. So she takes the Prophet ﷺ back to his mother, Amina. And she says, you can take care of him now. I don't want to take care of him. And she tried to not tell Amina that this happened, but eventually she had to. And Amina says at that point, don't worry, because I know that there's great events in store for my son. And so this was the first miracle that happened in the Prophet ﷺ's early life. And the splitting of the chest occurs actually many times afterward as well, at least twice. So this is not the first occurrence. But yeah, so that happened. And think of it as open heart surgery. Interestingly, what they also did was they poured Zamzam water onto the heart. And at that time, Zamzam water was not exactly how we think of filtered water. It was more salty, just a little bit salty. And if you know a bit about biology and medicine, salty fluid, it has certain electrolytes that if you're using it in open heart surgery, it nurtures the heart and it keeps it alive and flowing. So it's very interesting that there's two things that correlate with modern medicine that occurred over here. So a successful open heart surgery, you can call it. All right. So this occurred in the early life. And now fast forward to the development of the Prophet ﷺ in the city with his mother. And so what happens is he spends some time with his mother, but when he reaches the age of 6, his mother passes away. And soon after, Abdul Muttalib, who was his grandfather, also passes away. So now we have to go back to this chart and see, okay, who's going to take care of the Prophet ﷺ now? And you can see that he has many uncles here. He has Al-Harith, Abu Talib, Abu Lahab, and so on and so forth. These are his uncles. So at this point, without a mother and father, without the initial care of his grandfather, Abu Talib takes over and he becomes the foremost caretaker of the Prophet ﷺ. And so as the Prophet ﷺ is developing and he's growing up in the city, we have this story of Bahira the monk. So Abu Talib, he's a merchant and he goes to Syria. And at this point in the Arab society, when the uncle takes over the care of a child, that child becomes like the son. So he takes the Prophet ﷺ with him. And there's a character over there. His name is Bahira the monk. And this monk, think of him as like a Christian leader. He knew at the end of times, he knew about the occurrences of the end of times. So the akhirah, the different signs that show the end of times is near. And he also knew that a prophet from the Arabs would be coming soon. So he'd look out for this and he'd see any caravan that would pass by from the Arabs. And he would just see, is there a prophet there? How can I tell? And so on. So Abu Talib, he takes the Prophet ﷺ with him to Syria just to buy and sell some stuff. And he notices Bahira, the caravan of Abu Talib. And there's a cloud above them, shading them as they go and mark their path, which is interesting, just one cloud above this caravan. And so Bahira, he thinks, okay, I'll call this caravan for dinner and I want to know more about them. So he calls them for dinner. They come into his palace. And initially the Prophet ﷺ is told to stay outside and just take care of the camels. And Bahira the monk, he asks, is everybody here? Are we missing somebody? And then they say, okay, yeah, we have a 12-year-old person, a 12-year-old boy with us, and you've told him to take care of the camels. So Bahira asks him to come with him inside. And at this point, he's observing the Prophet ﷺ, and he's just looking at his behavior. And he asks him a question with the name of one of the idols of Quraysh. And the Prophet ﷺ says, I dislike that name. So he doesn't even say anything else. He just says that I dislike that name. And so at that point, Bahira knew that there's a possibility that this person is a prophet because he rejected the idol straight away. And that was like a natural thing for him. And interestingly, Bahira the monk, he also asked to see the back of the Prophet ﷺ. And here he sees a sign of prophethood. He sees the prophetic seal, which is a small raised circle of skin, and it has a few hairs around it. And this was between the shoulder blades of the Prophet ﷺ as a sign of prophethood. And it was mentioned in other scriptures before Islam that this seal is a sign of prophethood, and that whoever would have it would be the prophet. So at that point, Bahira knows that the Prophet ﷺ is the prophet, and he tells Abu Talib, he asks him a series of questions, and he just says, protect this person, and protect him from the envy of the Jews around Medina, because they were also waiting for a final prophet. And later on, we'll see that when the Jews understand that the Prophet ﷺ is from the Arabs, they don't like this at all, because they wanted the prophet to be from their lineage. So the Jews become enemies of the Prophet ﷺ, generally. But the ending of the story is just Bahira says, protect this person, because he knows he's a prophet now. So that's all we have for today. We'll stop here and we'll continue on with we'll continue on. There's an event after the Prophet ﷺ comes back into Medina, where he takes part in a pact of chivalry, which is an interesting occurrence from the early years of Islamic history. And then we'll go on to the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ, and then slowly we'll work our way up to the message of Islam itself. So we're almost there. Anybody have any questions about the splitting of the chest, questions about the year of the elephants, any of these occurrences?
Yeah, we do have one question.
Okay, perfect. Bismillah.
Scholars debate whether the Bahira, the monk story, actually did happen, because some scholars say that if it actually did happen, then the people back in Mecca would never question Prophet Islam, because then they would already have known the story, and they wouldn't have questioned him. Like, isn't that a debate going on?
So you said there's a debate because the people in Mecca would not know what? Could you say that again?
Isn't there a debate about if Bahira, the monk story, actually did happen? Because if it happened, the people back in Mecca would have already known. By the time Prophet Islam would say that, would call the people to Salah.
They would have known about what?
Like that, about the Bahira, the monk story.
How would they know? Bahir the monk was in Syria, so it's a far place away from Mecca, and the Arabs did not normally have as much interaction with him. It was just in the trade routes. So there was no interfaith dialogue. The Bahira the monk was not telling them that, oh, this person here is going to be a prophet, and I know exactly where he's going to come from. There was not this dialogue before. So technically, the people of Mecca did not know of this Christian faith and the Christian tradition before this occurrence. But there are signs of perhaps that this person could be a special person. The Prophet ﷺ, as soon as he came into the world, there was, like we just talked about, so many miracles, the light, the pregnancy, his entire family was just so overcome with joy, and all these different miracles that occurred during his early years. So obviously there were signs that this person is going to be special, but it's not necessary that the people of Mecca knew about the story beforehand, because there's no way to understand whether or not there was interfaith dialogue before the occurrence of this story. Is that getting to your point, or is there a different question that you have?
That's the point.
You sure?
So
If you want, what you can do is just send me an email afterward, and I can follow up, inshallah.
anybody else? Any questions?
Interaction, guys. Remember we talked about it last week. I need you guys to be interacting.
Sorry, guys. Think about anything you have,
Possible.
even if it's a simple question. Yeah, go ahead. Bismillah.
When the prophet's heart was taken out, did he say that, like, did anyone know if he felt pain or not?
Yeah.
Did you hear the question?
Yeah. So did the Prophet ﷺ feel pain when his heart was taken out?
Yeah, that was a question.
It's a good question. I don't want to assume, so I don't know if there was any pain felt or not. But given the theme and just the care that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for his prophet, because he's said to me many times he's the best of creation. So and just the fact that they had such care. The angels who came down were dressed in pure white, and they brought this bowl of snow, and they laid the Prophet ﷺ on his back with so much care. It's hard to assume what the feeling of the Prophet ﷺ was in that occurrence, because it's subjective. We don't have an objective fact as to, okay, this and this happened, and we can tell because the Prophet ﷺ himself said. It's possible that he felt frightened because obviously he's very young at that time. And if you know, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ's message, when Angel Jibreel came to Cave Hira, he was also frightened then because it was a really serious event. So there's possibilities. However, we don't want to assume anything. So what I can do is maybe I'll see if I can figure out if we know anything about what the Prophet ﷺ felt, and then let you guys know, inshallah.
Awesome.
How long did the Prophet stay with his grandfather?
So he stayed with his grandfather initially. I think he had about 8 years with his grandfather, but 4 of his early years were spent away in the desert. So at the time when the Prophet ﷺ was in the city, with his mother was 2 years, and in the care of his grandfather solely, I think it was 2 years as well. So you can say a total of 4 years he spent under the care of his grandfather in the city, and 2 of those years were with his mother.
Maiza?
Did all of the prophets have the seal, or was it just Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam?
Good question. The seal is only for the Prophet ﷺ. Other prophets did not have this. This was specifically for the Prophet because, as you can tell in the name, it's the seal of the prophethood. So it signifies that there's no one to be after him. And the reason why it's on his back, so it's between his shoulder blades. There's a bit of wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put that there, is because he's literally the khatam. He's the seal. There's nothing going to be after him. So he's the last one. So yeah.
And is there like controversy around it? Because a lot of people like have birthmarks. Could they think that they have the seal as well?
Yeah, good question, but there shouldn't be controversy because so like I said, Bahira the monk, he knew that this sign, this seal, will be an indication of a prophet because it was foretold in the previous scriptures. So if you can show me an ayah in the Quran where it says that Maiza will have a black dot on her left foot, and this will indicate that she's a prophet, then this will not go ahead. But I don't think there's anything that says that. So we're good on that. Alhamdulillah. We don't have to worry about that.
Anybody else? Alicia?
Did you say that his chest was open more than once?
Did you
Sorry,
hear her?
I can hear you.
She asked if his chest was open more than once.
Yes, it was. It was open once when he was 4, once when he was 10, and then I believe one more time or 2 more times, but around the range of 3 or 4 times. And there's wisdom behind each time. So give me 1 second. I think I had it written down somewhere here. But yeah, so around the age of 10 was the second time. And then there was a 3rd or 4th time. But the reason why, like if you think age of 10, why age of 10? Well, around this age is when many of us enter puberty. And obviously, it's a very difficult time. You have a lot of different thoughts going around. You make a lot of mistakes, basically, and you're just growing and developing. So the wisdom behind this is perhaps Allah wanted to protect the Prophet ﷺ from making these immature choices. You're just giving him a bit of protection and guard from this. And other kind of wisdoms behind this were, in the tradition, it says that every person, so all of us, every son of Adam, when they're born, they have a little black dot on their heart through which shaitan can do like some sort of whisperings, which is why we always need, seek protection in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from shaitan, except for the Prophet ﷺ, because his was taken out. So that's another reason why this occurrence occurred.
All right, I think that was the last question.
Guys, see, it's nice and fun.
Yeah. Oh, yep.
So wait, what was the seal again? Was it like a certain type of skin with that hair around it?
Yeah. So think of it as like it's like a bit of raised skin. So perhaps you have like, I don't know, some mark on your hand or something on your body, and it's just like a little raised circle of just extra skin with hair around it. some descriptions of it. So some people, when the Prophet ﷺ was declared as a messenger, and during the time of the Sahaba, they wanted to see this to seal, just because they heard that the seal was a sign of prophethood, and they wanted to see for themselves that the Prophet ﷺ really did have this, because it just increases them in certainty that this man that I'm looking at right now is the last prophet of God. And they saw the seal, and many of them said that it ranged from, like, some people's description said it was like a pigeon egg, and some people said it was like a raised fist. But the idea is the same. It's that it was a piece of raised skin that indicated that he was the last prophet.
All right. Thank you guys for your questions. I'm gonna stop the recording.
Okay, Faraz.
All right,
Yeah,
good job.